Oh my goodness me. Right. Evening, everyone. As I said, we'll look at some of the qualitative coding and the processes around qualitative coding. And the truth is, there's no other way to do it other than looking at examples. Now, as I had said 2 weeks ago when we spoke about this particular submission, this is also the first time where you start adding at a very small level, on a very small scale, you start adding new knowledge. And I think this to me is what is so special about this part of the research. Because in the past, we've always just rehashed and connected together stuff that previous people had written about a particular subject, a particular topic. But here, you are creating your own bits and pieces of information. Yeah, now I've got it recorded, Neil. Thank you for that. So what precedes this is this thing here. So rule one, you have to transcribe your interviews. It's non-negotiable. You have to transcribe your interviews. Now, I know some of you might not be able to type quickly enough to do your own transcripts, to type your own transcripts. The truth is, guys, the moment you start getting other people to type up and yeah, create your transcripts, it puts another layer of distance between you and the data. One of the things about qualitative data analysis is that you want to be beyond close to that data. You want to be immersed in the data. You want to try and connect what you are typing around the interview with what was said and whatever notes you've kept in terms of non-verbal cues, etc. So you'll see that this is what a transcript looks like. So there's nothing dramatic in terms of this. This is just simply an example. Just remember, this is what you will do for every single one of your interviews. This is what you'll do for every single one of your interviews. Now, to show you some of the examples of qualitative coding. Now, in terms of the coding process that we're going to follow, is you will have your transcripts, then you will do your codes. From your codes, you'll go to your categories, and from your categories, you will go to your themes. So multiple codes translate to fewer categories. Those multiple categories translate to fewer themes. Those themes ultimately is what you're aiming to get at. The one rule in terms of doing the codes, and I've tried to give a range of examples just to see how we make leaps in assumptions. So you have to give me breadcrumbs. You have to give the markers those breadcrumbs that will allow you to show us and will allow the marker to follow your jump and your thought processes and your essentially pulling together the data into these themes. Okay. So we need to see where you've made certain assumptions, where you've moved between the actual written, transcribed interview and your codes, etc., etc. We need to follow your thinking, and those breadcrumbs become important. So in terms of the first one here, this is what was said, and see how there is a leap in an assumption from there to there. Now, in terms of those leaps and assumptions, we need to be able to follow that. And that's why those breadcrumbs must be there. We must be able to see that somehow there is a logical connect between what came out of the interview and what became a code and what became a category and what became a theme. Have a quick glance at that specific page. Have a glance at that page. Any of those that as a leap in assumption appear too broad, just illogical, we can't follow it? Or is there enough evidence of breadcrumbs to show us the transition from the description to the theme? Now, we obviously have a lot more between that description there and the theme. We would have the transcript, we would have our codes, we would have our categories, and we would have our themes. So we will have more opportunities to show our leaps and assumptions. I mean, everyone is dead quiet, so I'm worried that I'm not making sense. Let me use a different example. Now, my apologies for the subject matter. And it is one of those where I apologize for the subject matter, but it's one of the best examples that I've seen of that kind of transition from codes to categories to themes. What I want you to imagine is that your transcripts sit somewhere here. So your transcripts will be here. And out of these transcripts, you will then create these, it's almost definitions, it's almost summary terms to describe what came out of the interview. So your interview sits here, your transcript sits here. Now have a glance at the different codes. Have a quick moment of that. And my apologies for the subject matter. My apologies for the subject matter, okay? And I'm not apologizing for the subject matter. It's the quality of the coding that's more important than the bloody subject matter, let's be honest. Georgia, so yeah, you can almost argue that it is a bullet point. To me, I don't mind how you do it, but it is about the presentation. I don't mind how this is presented. So these different codes would have come out of combinations of words, of comments, of quotes from those people that were interviewed. And I'll show you how to get there, because remember, you'll be sitting with 8 interviews and the transcripts of 8 interviews here. So let's start with the first bit. Can you see how the transition from there, from the first one, went to physical experiences? Now you can see that it's about contraception, etc., and I'm not worried about that. It's yeah, Georgia, I'm not sure. You see, we got to be very careful when we use the term deduction, because deduction goes in the opposite direction. So we use an inductive process here where we go from the specifics, which will be the actual interviews, which will be the actual interviews, and then through an inductive process. So the moment you say deduction, and I know exactly what you mean, because we're deducing the kind of assumptions here, but it destroys your golden thread, because deduction essentially goes from the general to the specific, where we take a theory and we go and prove it within a specific context, which will be quantitative. And it sounds like I'm being an absolute pain, but if you had to write deduction, and I know you won't, but if you had to write deduction in a qualitative report, somebody will comment their golden thread. Somebody will, without a doubt, comment golden thread. Okay. Sorry, Georgia. I'm being a real pain. Wonderful, Neil. You can see it in terms of the first theme. So those are the combinations, they're the summary terms that we've used to take whatever appeared in the interviews. Okay. And then you can see here the second part of it and the third part of it. And it's interesting how they've made that kind of transition. Have a look at any of the others. I want to show you something that, and again, this is an absolute disaster because I am working on an external drive here. Backup 25. Any others? And I can't see what you're typing. I've just got this document open. I want to show you something here. No. It's taking a little bit slow here. Oh gosh, sorry, my apologies. Everything is just slowed up here. I just want to move this across here. My apologies. Okay, I don't know why that jumped. Well, I know why it jumped because I tried to open others. Any other comments on that one? I just want to quickly grab something here. I'm trying to find a picture. This is infuriatingly slow. Sorry, guys. You see the jump. And for me, this is the best example that I've had. Now, in terms of the process, and we're far away from this particular process, guys, but once you have those themes, you will generally describe those themes. You will then take information from an interview to sort of bring how that theme lives within the context of an interview, and you will then connect those themes back to existing literature. But this is sweat. This doesn't happen automatically. It is really properly hard work. Now, one way to do it, and I'm quickly trying to find a picture, and my apologies, guys, this is hell of a slow. And I just want to show you how I arrived at my themes. Now, remember mine, slightly different, and we're not expecting you to create a new model or a new theory, but so is this cat? So just ignore here. But so what I did is, are you bugger? So what I did in terms of getting to those initial themes, okay, is I put it on, well, post-it notes would have worked better. But so in getting from the essentially the transcripts to the themes, I put where I saw a particular concept, a particular code, I put those codes on a piece of paper. And even if they didn't have the same terminology, I then put where I've had the same codes or similar ideas that mean the same thing, I then put them on whatever I'm going to call the overall code for that particular bit of information. So for me, those definitions there, weight gain, libido, would have been what is here. I'm a visual person. I really am a visual person. I have to see things. So you can see that those are the labels. It's not the best handwriting in the world, but those are the labels that essentially became my initial codes. Those were my initial codes. And then obviously the transition from there. And yeah, this is to show the transition process, guys. Remember, when you do a PhD, they expect so much extra evidence in terms of this, but that is what the different codes looked like. So these guys here, essentially, when I did the transcripts, I then put, if I did interview 1, I would do my coding for interview 1, I would do my coding for interview 2, and then I would logically combine those codes that mean the same thing and find a label that will mean that. This takes time. Okay, so in terms of this one, yeah, not my best example. So you can see here how quotations translate into themes. Again, it's the leap in assumptions, but we need to see the breadcrumbs. And I know I sound like a broken record when I say I need to see the breadcrumbs. So you can see here some of the quotations from the interviews, and they've called it a theme. We are not going to make a leap from interviews to themes. That is ridiculous. There is a process called abduction. We're not doing abduction. We're doing induction in terms of this one. And then this one as well. It's an interesting one, how they go from the actual response to codes. And it's a nice example of the initial coding. Now, I'm not worried about initial and focused coding. I mean, you can see these would be the codes that we would put together on a single pile, and this might be what we label the code. So in terms of my picture again here, you know, you could argue that those bits there would be what was written on these individual pieces of paper, and then the how I labeled the code would be that. But again, have a glance at this, the tidbits that were taken out of the statement there, and how it translates into the initial code. And that's why, guys, you type up your own transcripts. You type up your own transcripts, please. I promise you it becomes a real nightmare if you get someone else to type it up. It just becomes a distance between you and the data, and you want to be close to the data. And you don't have to use every single thing that a person says. You use what fits in with the title and the problem, etc. Because I think a lot of people will talk a lot, but there will be very little of value in there. And then some people will say very, very little. So in terms of the initial coding, so here is what is in your transcript. Okay, Morgan. So this is what is in your transcript. So what they've done in terms of this transcript is they've looked at certain combinations of words, so voice opinions to ask questions. And you can see there that to them, in terms of that code, was encouraging expression of viewpoint. So they've just added an extra step in. So in terms of my pictures, this is what would be on those individual papers, and that is what I would have labeled it. In terms of the second one, explain content, and you can see here how they responded to questions. Now, again, what makes this so difficult to do this is because we're not close to this data. We're divorced from the data. The kind of stuff that you'll have, your first order data, will be something that you're immersed in, will be something that you're very familiar with. But all they've done is, instead of jumping directly and making too big a leap to the code there, they've got what I would call subcodes that summarized into an overall code. Okay. I hope that makes sense, Morgan. We're going from transcript to codes to categories to themes. So many codes become fewer categories, many categories become fewer themes. And that logical transition and that whoever marks this can see the leaps in your assumptions. Here is another one. I think we've seen that one. The transition from quotation to codes, etc. How's it, Tashila? And you can see how that it's not the best one that I have. There are a couple of others, but none of this makes sense until you actually go and do your own coding. None of this makes sense until you go and do your own coding. So another one here. I know that's a rubbish one. My apologies. Yeah, sorry, it's the same thing. But none of this matters, and you'll see I've given YouTubes, and I'll load these. None of this matters until you actually go and do your interviews. All of this is a complete waste of time until you get to do your interviews. So for me, we've got to move with the interviews, and then we've got to do the transcripts. Now, I'm obviously talking to the qualitative people here. So all of this is a moot point. All of this is a moot point. But I can tell you now, this is tough. This is heck of a tough, but it's also heck of a gratifying. Because I think part of this process is that you sweat through your own bits of created data, and that you create your own bits of information and your own bits of knowledge. My apologies. Let's see what else I've got here. Let's just see which one this is. My apologies. Okay, yeah, I'll share all of these, guys. Yeah, how to do coding. They all say different things. Let me have a glance at this one. Yeah, this is an interesting one. Let me just move this around. So this is from one of my students. This is from one of the earlier students, and this was her transition, or her transitions. So again, imagine that the transcripts sit over here, and have a glance at her transitions. Have a glance at her transitions, those bits of breadcrumbs that she's left behind. So we don't know what is here, but we can infer from her codes. It was a very, very good coding exercise. This took time. I mean, this took a little bit of blood and sweat and tears, and there will be tears. And I promise you guys, you will have moments where you will convince yourself that you are as dumb as the piece of paper that you're writing on. I mean, it really is a wonderful transition. I don't know if anyone else can see the kind of links and the transitions and the leaps there. So that was her first theme. This was the second theme. And again, you can see the logic there. And again, and to also just say, this looks strange, it looks weird, but until you've gone and done your transcripts and struggled through it, it takes on special meaning. It will take on really, really special meaning. And you can see there as well. This was one of the best that I had seen. I've a sneaky feeling this is one of my students that I've supervised. I've done so many students, guys. I mean, yeah, I'm close to 200 people that I've supervised over time now, and the visual presentation looks very good. And obviously, let's be honest, you can make it look better. But I thought this was bloody good. This is my student who did her research on reconstituted cotton and suggesting that when we buy clothes, we should buy clothes that essentially were made out of recycled cotton. They call it reconstituted cotton, recycled cotton. It was a really, really good, and I wrote an article and I stole bits and pieces from it, and obviously gave her credit for the witness at some point. But that's what we're looking for, those kinds of transitions. I think you can make it look better visually, but the transitions are very, very good. Transitions are very good, and that's what we look for in terms of markers in particular and moderators. So hers would have gone for moderation, but it really, the leaps are there, and it's a wonderful, wonderful example. Okay. So at this point, guys, I'm wasting your time. I really am wasting your time. You've got to get here and you've got to get out and do your interviews. That's the next important bit. Now, I don't know when the next submission is due, still bearing in mind that we have some flexibility in terms of that submission. But remember, the final submission, that date, we cannot change. Guys, would you mind if I meet with some of the quantitative people that are struggling, in particular with James, and we call it quits? I will make sure that I give extra time to you guys when we need it, when all of this, again, this is that kind of treading water moment. It is very little that we can achieve at this stage. So I'm just going to stop the recording. Okay.